On the freezing night of January the 6th, 1994, 66-year-old Shirley Leach, a devoted mother and grandmother, stepped into the public toilets at Bury Interchange, unknowingly crossing into the lair of a predator. She had spent the evening visiting her daughter at Fairfield General Hospital, a simple act of love that would lead her to a fate drenched in unimaginable horror. Her mutilated, half-naked body was discovered just after 4:15 a.m. the following morning, crumpled in a squalid toilet cubicle. The widow had been strangled, her frail body violated and desecrated with almost ritualistic brutality. She was not merely murdered, she was butchered, left in a pool of blood, her flesh torn and her dignity stripped. This was a scene of human depravity.
Like a mother to me. We used to have a laugh together and spend plenty of time together. We could go out and have a good laugh, have a joke. Last time I saw her on 6th of January when we went to visit my mother in hospital.
Shirley was 5 foot 2 inches and weighed just 7 stone. Born in Pendleton, Shirley Baglin was the 4th of 5 children and had left school at 14 to work as a factory machinist. Now at the age of 20 she married Ronald Leach, a foundry worker in Bury, and this was in 1948 and after a 2-year courtship. Now Shirley and Ronald, they would have 2 children together, Beryl and Gary. But from all accounts, life wasn't always simple and straightforward, and they had to make way best they could in life. Money wasn't always easy to come by, and sometimes Shirley would have to save pennies just so she could provide a holiday for herself, Ronald and obviously her 2 children. And they used to go to Blackpool. They used to spend a week at least once a year over in Blackpool. So money, like I said, it was very hard to come by, but she would save as best she could. Now as the years went by, one of Shirley's children, Beryl, she went on to have a child of her own called Darren. And Darren himself would often travel to Blackpool with his grandparents, Shirley and Ronald. Now Darren, he himself plays an important part in today's story, and we're going to talk more about Darren's life and what occurred with himself and his grandmother Shirley in 1994 as we walk along through Bury Cemetery. And as this story evolves, you'll understand the heartache and the pain that Darren himself went through. It was in 1960 that Shirley and Ronald moved into their new 3-bedroom semi-detached council house on Home Avenue in Brandlesham. And it is here where Shirley herself would nurse Ronald through his remaining days. After being diagnosed with cancer, Ronald sadly passed away just 6 months later. And it was at this time that Shirley and her grandson Darren, they would become pretty much inseparable. And Darren would spend a lot more time with his grandma, visiting her house. They would go on day trips into Bury and to visit Bury Market. On the 6th of January 1994 and at around 9 p.m, Shirley and Darren, they had made their way onto the 469 bus, which was going to take Shirley to the Bury Interchange. Now Shirley and Darren had been to the Fairfield Hospital that week and leading up to the 6th of January, visiting Beryl. And Beryl had some operation of sorts, and both Shirley and Darren, they'd been going up there daily to basically keep Beryl company. Now on the night in question, Darren vacated the 469 bus somewhere around Bell Lane. But as for Shirley, she carried on her journey to the Bury Interchange. Now it was at the Bury Interchange where Shirley was going to jump off one bus and get onto another, which would then take her closer to her home. But unfortunately, because the 469 bus was running late, she missed her connecting ride, and she would basically have to wait at least 45 minutes or more before her next bus would arrive. Witnesses would later recall seeing Shirley standing beneath a shelter, alone and vulnerable. And it was around 9:30 p.m. when a small group of teenagers, they came forward and said they heard a scream from the direction of the toilets, but one of the boys dismissed it as being nothing but a prank. Now, there were other witnesses who would later come forward saying they saw a hunched, unsettling figure, aged roughly between 30 and 50. He was no taller than 5 foot 5 inches, and he was seen hovering near, close to where the toilets were. At around 4:30 on the 7th of January, 4:30 in the morning I should say, a young couple had arrived back into the town centre after a night out clubbing over in nearby Bolton. Now, the young lady, she needed a pee, and she asked her boyfriend if there were any toilets nearby, to which he said there were some at the Bury Interchange. Now, this young lady, she went into the restroom and she tried to push open the cubicle door. There was one cubicle which was still unlocked. But as she pushed the door, she had a little bit of restraint against it. But the more she pushed, the more she managed to open it bit by bit. It was only when she had enough room to pop her head around the corner, this is when a horrific sight would be in front of her. And it was the sight of an elderly lady. And this elderly lady, she was lying on her back face upwards. She was semi-naked. There was splatterings of blood on the walls, on the floor. The lady herself, she was covered in blood. Now, at the time, this young lady who stumbled across this body, she fled in fear. But it wasn't until the police arrived when the full ferocity, the ferociousness of the attack came into view. The lady in question, who was found butchered on this floor, was that of 66-year-old Shirley Leach. And when the police arrived and they began to cordon off the area, they went into the cubicle to look at the crime scene itself. One of Shirley's breasts had been removed. Her right breast had been hacked away, tore off and taken away. Like I said, there was blood all over the cubicle. It was like a scene from a horror movie, as one detective would later go on to say. There were other marks, bruising on Shirley's body. She had bruising around her neck like she had been strangled. And a pathologist would later go on to say that it was strangulation itself which may well have led to the death. But we'll get back to that shortly. But as for the mutilations, we're not going to go too deep into what else possibly occurred, because we have read several differing reports. And one of the reports is quite graphic, but we're not going to mention that in this video. We do know, like I said, the right breast was removed, and it seems that some broken glass that was found at the scene was used to cut away at the breasts. Now, one of the detectives and the pathologists, the report that came out, would state later that it seems highly probable that Shirley, despite being strangled, may have died from a heart attack. And this heart attack was brought on by fear after she was attacked by the person responsible. The murder scene itself, it was quickly cordoned off. There was a hive of activity. And as people walked from the slumber and the townsfolk of Bury began to leave their homes to go to work or from work to arrive back home, obviously people began seeing the police, the lights, and they were wondering what was going on. Word soon spread that a murder took place. The Bury Interchange, it was sectioned off. Nobody was allowed in or out of the actual services themselves. As for the cubicle, forensics were soon, they were doing their job diligently. They were taking as much time as possible to collect as much data as possible. Now we have to remember that these were public cubicles, so many people would have been in and out of that cubicle throughout January the 6th, maybe the 5th, the 4th, the 3rd, blah blah blah. So obviously you're going to have a lot of people potentially leaving DNA behind. So the forensics had a hard task trying to collate as much DNA evidence as possible. Now, as for Shirley and why her breast was possibly missing, the police seem to believe that the killer had returned to remove it because he might have remembered or worried that he may have left some DNA behind or some evidence behind, maybe a bite mark. And again, we'll mention the bite mark again during this video because it does play an important role. But certainly that breast was removed. Now, the killer may have come back, like I said, to destroy any potential evidence. But there was one piece of evidence that he didn't manage to find or destroy himself. And this was a very small smearing of blood which was found on the cubicle door. The killer had left his own DNA behind when he was leaving that cubicle. Now this is the Bury Interchange, and it's here where Shirley Leach sadly lost her life on the 6th of January 1994. But her body wasn't discovered until the early hours of the 7th of January and at around 4:30 AM. Like I said earlier in the video, when that young couple came here because they needed a pee. But it was in the cubicle, the ladies' toilets, on one of the cubicles, where she would make that horrific discovery of poor Shirley lying on the floor. As we touched upon earlier in the video, a lot has changed here at the interchange itself, and it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where those cubicles were, but we do have a feeling they may well have been just right in front of us here. And it is in one of these cubicles where, like I said, Shirley, her body was discovered. Now we do have a lot of crime scene photos and video footage which we're going to put over this video today. That was taken back in '94, and you'll see what it used to look like back then. But like I said, it has changed quite substantially over the years. Detective Chief Superintendent Ian Maskery, he had his own opinion on what may have occurred prior and leading up to the murder of Shirley herself, and he believed that there were one of two situations. One, her murderer, he was a chancer. He'd been out, he'd met Shirley, and this is when he committed the crime. He dragged her into the toilets before butchering her. And another theory is he was already in the cubicles just waiting for a victim to enter. Now obviously other conspiracies and other stories came out shortly after Shirley's murder. Some were saying that this person had monitored her movements and been watching her from afar, but a lot of people also dismissed that. And again, it simply does seem a case that Shirley's murderer himself, it was a chance encounter, and they were going to take the life of anybody or the first person that their paths crossed with. And unfortunately for Shirley, Shirley was that person. Now, Chief Superintendent Ian Maskery and his team, they will painstakingly search through all the forensics and any other evidence that they could find. But as the weeks, the months and the years went by, they didn't get any closer to finding out who the killer was. And it was in March 2006 when a breakthrough was finally made. Now, over in Moston, Manchester way, a chance encounter with a young man by the name of Ian O'Callaghan would pretty much solve this case. And O'Callaghan himself, he was pulled over by the police and breathalyzed for drink driving. He was taken in and swabs were taken, and his DNA would eventually match the DNA database and that of the potential killer of Shirley Leach. You see, the blood that was found in the cubicle back in 1994, like I said, it was painstakingly checked. And on the door itself was a small sliver, a small sample of more blood that wasn't Shirley's. And it seems that the killer had cut themselves with that sharp piece of glass, that broken glass that was used to attack Shirley. And his blood appeared on the back of this cubicle door. But they didn't have a match back in 1994 and the years after that. It was only in 2006 and the chance encounter with O'Callaghan in Moston that DNA would finally pair up.
None were more shocked by who Ian O'Callaghan was and the life he was living than DS Andy Meeks and his team, who made the arrest.
Now, those who lived near him in Rugby Close, Brandlesham, O'Callaghan was unremarkable. He was a father, he was a neighbour, nothing spectacular. He was 38 years old at the time of his arrest. But beneath the mask of normality, there lurked a man capable of unspeakable acts. And at the time of the murder on Shirley Leach, he had lived just 15 minutes away on New Cateaton Street with his girlfriend. He simply blended in with people. He was a normal looking sort of guy. Now, when the police searched his home after his arrest in 2006, they found one chilling artefact. And this is a book which details how a rapist was caught by teeth marks left in a victim's breast. And the grotesque irony was lost on nobody. Now, O'Callaghan's DNA had matched that of blood found on the door handle of the toilet cubicle. And it appears that he had cut his hand during the attack. And there was just 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance of the killer being someone else, as the forensics would later go on to testify. But upon his arrest, he told detectives it's a mistake. But this had been no mistake. O'Callaghan, you see, he had a record of violence towards women. And at the age of 16, he had broken into a house before sexually assaulting a lady who was in her bed at the time. He had also been done for other violent assaults on other people throughout his life. So this was no mistake. The police had the right man. Now, O'Callaghan himself, he will be charged with the murder of Shirley Leach. In November 2006, Ian O'Callaghan was convicted of Shirley's murder. Trapped by DNA evidence, he collapsed and wept when told he must serve at least 28 years. And describing the 38-year-old as a sexual deviant, the judge told him, "You attacked her in a most vicious and violent way." He said O'Callaghan may have decided to amputate her breast to destroy evidence, but added there was a possibility he had been taking it for a trophy. The judge was going to tell O'Callaghan, "You had a propensity for violence and sexual misconduct towards women who were strangers to you, as your 3 previous convictions would demonstrate." The victim was vulnerable. She had mental and physical suffering inflicted upon her before death. Being attacked in those circumstances must have been quite horrific. But the murder of Shirley Leach wasn't the last time O'Callaghan would inflict pain and misery on another female. And it was only several years later and after the murder of Shirley that O'Callaghan attacked and sexually assaulted an 11-year-old girl. Now, this 11-year-old girl, she kept this hidden away for 15 or so years. And she only came forwards after the arrest and the charge of murder and the guilty plea being made on O'Callaghan for the murder of Shirley Leach. That is when this girl, this lady at this point, came forwards and reported it to the authorities. She felt safe to do so. The 11-year-old victim, and during the time of her assault at the hands of O'Callaghan himself was a bus driver, and he was wearing the bus driver's uniform at the time of the attack. And after assaulting her and leaving her behind, he whispered a threat. Let's see if you can keep this secret. He threatened her that if she spoke of it, this attack, he would come and find her and he would kill her. This put the fear of God into her. She was 11 years old. Now, as the months went by, this young girl encountered O'Callaghan a few times because O'Callaghan was also a bus driver at this point. And there was one instance when her parents were going to get onto a bus, O'Callaghan was driving. But this young girl began, I won't use the word freaking out, but she got edgy and she didn't want to get on the bus because, obviously, of what he had done to her. But she kept this secret hidden for many, many years. Then in 2016, she finally found the strength to speak. Now, the victim, who was now 28 and had a child of her own, eventually went to the police. And this was simply because, obviously, she knew she was safe now. O'Callaghan was behind bars for the murder of Shirley Leach. Now, O'Callaghan at this point was serving at least 28 years imprisonment for that murder. But this victim, after going to the police and O'Callaghan himself, he would then be charged and brought back into courts for the rape and the sexual assault of this poor girl. He would face another 16 years on top of his 28-year term. Darren Linton sadly passed away at the age of 42 on Valentine's Day in 2017. Now, Darren had become traumatised after the murder of his grandmother, and before this event, Darren was a normal and happy teenager. However, for several years, Darren had himself struggled to deal with what had happened to Shirley. It took 12 years for the police to solve the Shirley Leach murder case, and Darren became very depressed during this time. He also became very withdrawn and he blamed himself for leaving his grandmother on the bus. His mother also became ill with stress-induced mouth cancer before losing her fight in July 1999. Darren was devastated and was taking medication to help him deal with his loss. And during this time he was still in regular contact with his father, but sadly they became more and more distant. It was on March the 8th, 2017, when Darren's family, friends and neighbours all gathered together at the Rochdale Crematorium. And here, it was a very small but nice ceremony that took place. Now here in Bury Cemetery, we have located the final resting place of Shirley Leach. And as you can see from the headstone, and I will read it out, it simply says, in loving memory of Ronald Leach, born the 16th November 1923, died 26th of October 1992. Also Shirley Leach, a dear wife, mum and gran, died tragically Jan 6, 1994, aged 66 years. Also their daughter Beryl Linton died 19th of July 1999, aged 48 years, forever in our thoughts. But it is here, certainly, where poor Shirley, her remains now lay. We won't name the monster that took her life because it would be disrespectful, I think. But it's such a tragic story, absolutely tragic. And as with many of these stories, it didn't just affect, obviously, one person, Shirley herself, but obviously many more. We know Darren himself struggled emotionally, mentally, pretty much for the rest of his life. Always blamed himself for leaving his grandmother alone on the bus that evening, but no one was to know that this monster was lurking in the shadows. but the final resting place of Shirley Leach. Now, we'd know Darren after his cremation in Rochdale. Our Just Giving page was set up by family and friends to raise money for his ashes to be placed somewhere. Now, it was during the evening last night, myself and Vicky were talking about this, and we couldn't find any records of where those ashes were. We looked and looked and looked, and I said, I wonder if his name would be on the headstone here at Bury Cemetery, but it isn't. But what's that there on the floor, Vicky? So we have a plaque. Right, yeah, so we have a plaque with his name on. In loving memory, Darren Linton, sadly missed, never forgotten. So the family did have a little plaque made in his name, which is nice. One, yeah, Vicky was just saying, so this is where they've obviously scattered his ashes. Well, when I say obviously, I think that was the plan from reading the Just Giving page. But it is nice that he is here with his grandmother, who he was so fond of.
And his mum.
And his mum, yeah, obviously his mum. So they are together here. Now, we have got 2 roses today, because one is for Darren, because we had a feeling, didn't we, that his ashes may well be here, and we are glad that we've confirmed it, because Darren, like I said, he suffered immensely, as did all his family, obviously with the death of Shirley. But yeah, it is nice to see that there is a plaque. Just hope they're resting in peace now. Now, Bury Interchange itself over the years has changed quite a lot in the way it looked from when it did back in 1994. But the legacy that O'Callaghan has left behind still scars people to this day. And this story itself, whilst it has been covered by other channels here on YouTube, it's one that still remains one of the darkest, most bloodiest murders to have happened, to occur here in Bury itself. Bury is a friendly town. People come from all over to visit the famous Bury Market. I've been coming here for many, many years, since I was a child with my parents, and I have never experienced anything untoward. A lot of people will tell you the same. It is such a friendly go-to place. A lot of history, a lot of local history. But this awful death, this awful murder of Shirley Leach, it perhaps still is, like I said, the most bloodiest that's ever occurred here in and around this area. Now, as we leave Bury Cemetery behind, please let us know in the comments down below if you have heard of this tragic story of Shirley Leach and the brutal murder that took place here in the town of Bury. This monster lurked in the shadows. He walked amongst people, the townsfolk of Bury. He walked amongst them like it was a free man. There was absolutely no worry for him ever to be caught. But DNA did catch up with him many, many years later, and in 2006 he was finally apprehended. But if you do know the story, comment down below. Also, if this content is the kind of content you do like, again, please consider subscribing to the Days of Horror YouTube channel. Also, if you can share the video, if you can give us a thumbs up, it would mean a lot to myself and Vicky, because we do put a lot of time and effort in each and every story, from the researching to the travelling to the editing. But if you can do those things, we would really appreciate it. But in the meantime, we're going to leave Bury Cemetery behind. If you enjoyed it, do those things. But as I always say, I want you to stay safe, stay curious, and we will be back soon with more tales from our dark, but at times glorious past.